Tonight's show is brought to you by 19th Century United States Government Expansionist Policies, baddie Optics, and you, our listeners. It's the night before the dawn, before the day of the podcast drop. Ghost of Christmas present if he were a podcaster. Probably. What is up, all of you wayward souls, and welcome back to the Wayward Stories podcast. Wayward Stories is the podcast where we tell the tales of our adventures and our wanderings and our wonderings. How's everyone doing tonight? Are you guys ready for your holiday season? I'm looking to get this recorded and dropped in time for possibly some of you taking your holiday road trips for Christmas or whatever other holiday you might celebrate. So you guys will have this. And as well, for those of you that are souls like me that may just be out there making a road trip because that's the kind of life you choose to lead. So maybe I can be a part of your holiday expedition. That would make me oh so happy. And on that note, we'll walk right into housekeeping. We're going to get right into it tonight. There's not a lot of stuff to do up front. So first of all, housekeeping, please rate, please review, please subscribe wherever you rate, review, or subscribe. Also, if you know someone you think would like this show, send them a direct text message with a link to the show, either the YouTube version or the audio version. That's how shows like mine, this is how they expand. The only way we really get out there is by people sharing, because we don't have, budgets. Independent podcasting, we don't exactly have budgets to advertise for our own show. So you guys, if you would, share the podcast anywhere you think to share it. Quick reminder for this time of year, as I mentioned at the end of last week's episode, or last episode that we dropped, you guys, if this is a hard time of year for you, make sure and find your support group, your support network, reach out to them, set up your road trips, do whatever it is you need to do to keep yourself sane, to keep yourself emotionally, spiritually, psychologically healthy. And if you need someone to talk to, mywaywardstory@gmail.com. Get in touch. We will establish contact and I will be happy to talk to you. So just remember, you're not alone this time of year. If you are hearing my voice right now, you're not alone, because I'm riding with you and you can get in touch and we can chat about it. So please don't hesitate to do that. That is what I'm here for. And with that said, it is the season, right? It's the night before the dawn, before the day of the podcast drop. Ghost of Christmas present if he were a podcaster. Probably. But yeah, we're getting this guy recorded and we're going to get this guy dropped as soon as we possibly can. So you guys will have it for your holiday enjoyment. And we're going to talk about, as you've seen from the episode title, Fort Smith, my little city that I have, besmirched on so many occasions. As someone that lives in a place, you get the bad side of it. You have to deal with the local economy, all that stuff, So I've had my take on it over the years. But to be fair, as I've thought about, if you're a visitor coming to this city and you're bringing visitor money from outside and you don't have to live here and you don't have to really deal with our economy, you just get to benefit from it. Everything's so cheap because we have no economy. This is probably a really cool place to come check out. This would be a really cool place for a little adventure, especially if you're into history of multiple facets, multiple eras anyway. And we're a great kind of central base camp for, hey, I could get a hotel there and then I could shoot out in any direction an hour or two and have a lot of really cool stuff to do. And so I've been thinking for a long time, I need to do a podcast on our city, on our sites, on our things to do. We touched on it a little bitty bit, I think, when I did Ozark Mountain Battlefields. It was an episode on the battlefield, Civil War battlefields you can find here in the Ozarks. But we did not really go into detail about many of the other facets of our city, our site. We have a very long history for, this far west in the United States. Compared to Boston or anywhere up in the Northeast, no, it's not that old of a history. But we start about 1817 as far as official federal involvement in affairs of the countryside. But before that, we had the French explorers, the coureurs, the voyageurs, so to speak. They're going up and down the rivers, and they were fur trapping, and they actually lived kind of, what's the right word? Symbiotically with the Native Americans. Like, they kind of got along. It's like, you have the things we want, we have things that you want. Like, we're all just people. Let's do people things. We'll trade. We'll work together. They intermarried, named a lot of our places around here in French, and this is throughout the 1600s into the 1700s. Many of our names, our place names here in this state, Dardanelle, Maumelle, in Oklahoma and Indian Territory, before it was even Indian Territory, and it was just basically French Louisiana. You had Choteau, Oklahoma, several outposts that were called Choteau, and that was a Frenchman's last name who established a lot of trading posts. He has a lot of historical ties to the Osage Nation and the people at our site. Poteau is a French word for post. The Sans-Bois Mountains, the Sandboys is what we call them, Sandboy Mountains. But they're Sans-Bois, which means without trees. And then we have Bois d'Arc wood, which around here people call it Bodark, Osage orange, horse apple trees. Those are, that French word means the bow wood, which is what the Osage and before them the Caddo more specifically used for their hunting bows and their crafting of atlatl dart throwers, and anything that you made out of wood you would have used Bodark for, Bois d'Arc, because it's like the densest hardwood in freaking North America. It's one of the densest hardwoods in the world. Like, you want to talk about make a wampum stick, a hiking stick that you'll never break. Bodark, Bois d'Arc, Osage orange, horse apple tree, whatever you want to call it. It is an excellent hiking stick making wood. I just made actually several hiking sticks for all of my ranger buddies and for my daughter, including a couple of Harry Potter wands in there and an atlatl dart thrower out of a bunch of Osage orange I was able to salvage from a tree that was cut down recently. And I'll tell you this, I will never, ever, 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 ever make anything out of Bois d'Arc, ever again. That is the hardest wood to work with ever. Oh my God. It was kind of nightmarish. Super fun. I enjoyed the process. I enjoyed making the things. I haven't been able to do anything super creative in a long time. Like manually creative, like tactile like that. And it was very satisfying. And the end results were really beautiful to me. I love them. And everyone I gave them to for holiday gifts seemed to love them. So it's very cool, but we have kind of some of those cultural ties like that. And the French were a very big part of our area before even the U.S. government came in. Why did all of these things happen, right? Why am I going to tell you about Fort Smith tonight? Well, we have a lot of really cool places to check out. We have Fort Smith National Historic Site, where I am now a park ranger, and I've been volunteering for 3.5 years. We have the United States Marshals Museum, which is the national museum for the United States Marshal Service. We have Miss Laura's Visitor Center, which is now the Miss Laura's Brothel Museum, because it is it's the only remaining house of 5, or maybe it was 6, houses of ill repute that were down on the row, as it was called here in Fort Smith back in the day. That's where you could get some entertainment for the evening with a female, if you were a pathetic man who could not get entertainment with a female through normal means and you had to pay for it. That's where you would go. So we have Miss Laura's, we have the Fort Smith Museum of History, and we have lots of things regionally that are tied into different aspects of history that are state parks, national parks. So we have a lot of really cool stuff to talk about here in Fort Smith. And so, as I was starting to say earlier, and probably didn't finish because that's how I do things, run around in circles, chasing rabbits, going down the rabbit hole, on my patented tangents. We have a lot here that's actually really interesting. That'd be really cool for the traveler. And I've gotten the chance to kind of see that perspective and getting to now do it every day and talk to people every day that come in and they're like, oh, this is so cool. I was driving down 40. I'm going across country. It's a cool place to stop, get my passport stamp and my national parks passport book. And how cool is this? You guys have all this history. I never knew. So being able to see it from someone else's perspective has helped me to really kind of take a little bit broader view and go, okay, from the outside in, this actually might be a pretty cool place to visit. So we're going to talk about tonight all of these things. I get to basically, this is a one-off easy episode for me because I just got to talk about Fort Smith. I get to talk about what I've been talking about for 3.5 years and tell you a lot of our great stories and tie it all into the local geography and what you could do, what you can see if you come down here, and also tell you a little bit about our city because we do have some pretty cool stuff, some cool places to eat that you can't eat anywhere else in the country but here. A lot of stuff like that. So that's what we're going to get into tonight. We're doing mostly wandering from an outsider's perspective, from an insider's perspective, via an insider's perspective. So buckle your chin straps. Who knows how this is really going to go? But I promise you, I've got all the words. Plenty of words for tonight. So let's get right into it. First of all, the context. Why did Fort Smith become a thing to start with? Well, it began with before westward expansionist policy of the U.S. government. It was more like southeastern expansionist policy, as some of the earliest settlers and some of the earliest settlements and the early colonies began to continually try to spread out further and further towards Appalachia and down into the southeast, and then eventually over the Cumberland Gap and into, what would that be, eastern Tennessee, eastern Kentucky. A lot of friction was happening with the local native tribes, like the Cherokee, who were already there and who were understandably kind of ticked off about people coming in and taking all their crap and killing all their family. You know, it's a reasonable thing to be upset about, I feel like, but you know, that's just me. And with that happening, it was creating a lot of pressure on the U.S. government to continue to try to eat up more land. Hence, we get to like the Louisiana Purchase and we buy all this land because Napoleon's in a bind. Basically, History 101. Think of Napoleon selling the Louisiana Territory for like pennies on the dollar, like quite literally, as him being in a bind with the rent and going and hawking something really valuable and then not being able to get it out of hawk. Now, he didn't exactly hawk it to us, but in a sense, he sold something for almost nothing because he needed the money to finance wars, basically. So, sticking with kind of the vibe of the Fort Smith area, you go and hawk things because there's never enough money. So Napoleon basically hawked Louisiana to the United States, and now we got all this new territory. Well, the federal government pursues its pressure on the indigenous peoples, Choctaw, Cherokee, Chickasaw Creek, the Seminole, everyone in the Southeast, trying to move them out west. And there was a group we know as the Cherokee old settlers, the earliest settlers. And what they did is they kind of saw the writing on the wall and were like, you know what? We could go through this nightmare, or we could leave now, go on our terms at our time, not during the winter or any crappy time of year, take our stuff, and in a little bit more leisurely fashion, make our way west and pick the best places before anyone else gets forced over there. And that's kind of the nutshell of how we start to see the first Cherokee settlers move into western Arkansas and the eastern Oklahoma area, which is right where Fort Smith's situated, right on the line. And with that, the Cherokee start showing up out here. And then they start getting into it with the Osage because the Osage happened to already be here. And now the Osage are understandably like, bro, who are you? Why are you taking our food? Why are you killing our animals? Why are you out here why are you on our hunting lands? Why are you trying to marry my sister? Like, get away from my wife. Like, there started to be problems because we have two tribes that were historically in no way related to each other and in no way in any real contact with each other until this moment. And the Cherokees show up and they're like, we have to go somewhere. We don't have anywhere to go. What do you want us to do? And the Osage are like, I don't know. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. And they start to have problems. And forever, the U.S. government's policy was, that's great. That's great. They're going to kill each other. That's less problems for us. That is literally the policy of the U.S. government at the time. If you don't believe me, look it up. But then white settlers start to show up in this region. Because again, we bought Louisiana. Now it's United States territory. And people started coming this way. And they want, again, it's never enough. We're going to keep moving west. My relatives, my ancestors are some of those people. Scotch Irish ancestry, Welsh, little bit of German in there. And that's, I mean, these are my great, great, great grandparents. I can take you back 6 generations to some of the earliest settlers to Arkansas. These are the people that were showing up out here and not necessarily should have been, right? This is supposed to be the Indian Territory starting to happen. So they start to show up. Then they start to complain to the U.S. government. Hey, we feel unsafe. You know, people are like taking our crops and stuff. And it's like, if we were to take a culturally appropriate look at this, I speak as a cultural anthropologist, we would go, so the people who already lived here were looking at you as invaders of their territory and were trying to expel you. And you see that as a bad thing. That shows you how ethnocentrically minded these people were. Like, we are better than you. We come and we take what we want. Why do you not understand this? And the people that were already here were like, we're human beings and this is our stuff and you better get, GTFO. And so problems were happening. And now the federal government says, look, we've got a perfect opportunity to start to establish a military presence in the West. And this begins the long march to the ocean. And the ocean wasn't even the end of it, right? We went all the way to Hawaii. We went all the way to Guam. It just kept going. This is how we did things back in those days. But this is the beginning of it. In Fort Smith, as such, where we were situated on the Arkansas River, you got 3 rivers that go out to the west, somewhere out to the west. Missouri River, which goes from basically St. Louis all the way up into the Northwest Territories type of area, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Idaho, passes over into Oregon. You get into the Oregon Trail stuff. Everyone's dying of dysentery. That's a whole thing. The second one, the one right through the heart of the country, is the Arkansas River and the Canadian River and the Red River. Well, the Red River is a little bit further south and has a 100-mile log jam. Literally a 100-mile log jam. It was known as the Great Raft. Again, look it up. Kind of inhibited travel because boats were the highway transportation of the time. Rivers were the interstate highway systems. So the Arkansas River, coming off the Mississippi all the way up into the Colorado, into Colorado, into the Rocky Mountains, was like the interstate highway of its day, and it was perfectly situated to take people out west through the Great Plains. And so Fort Smith, right at the very edge of what would become Arkansas territory and the very edge of what would become Indian territory, became like the central hub for Southwest expansion. And this starts in 1817. So you want to talk about the Wild West. People think of the Wild West. You think of Tombstone, right? You think of Dodge City, Boot Hill. Those places are in the 1880s, right? And they have like 5 minutes of fame. You have like 60 seconds in the OK Corral, right? Wyatt Earp was a horse thief in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and Van Buren, Arkansas, before he ever went out and ended up in a shootout at the OK Corral. Just FYI. Fort Smith was the Wild West for like 80 years, not 80 seconds. I always tell it to people this way. Tombstone had its moment, right? It did, and it's a glorious moment, and it made for a great movie. But there's only one place on this planet that I ever heard of someone bringing a cannon to a fist fight, and that was Fort Smith. And it happened right on our grounds, basically right in the parking lot of our National Historic Site is where it would have been, somewhere along that row. And I'm going to tell you that story in just a minute. But essentially, we are the most southwestern terminus of this newly acquired region, and it perfectly sets us up to go into the Mexican-American War, right? 46 through 48, which was another land grab. Totally. Like, there's no reason to go fight with Mexico except we wanted their crap. That's history. Go look it up. And it sets us up to do that. But over that period, 1817 into the 1840s, everything's starting to really, the engine's really starting to wind up on Manifest Destiny, on westward expansion. We're really starting to try to push the native tribes out of the southeast. We have the Indian Removal Act. Official version of it starts in 1830, right? So that starts to push all of the Native Americans out of the southeast into Indian territory and trying to consolidate them over here. And now we have all the white settlers who are still expanding all the way right up to that line and then cheating their way even into Oklahoma, which was at the time Indian territory. It never stopped. The appetite was insatiable, and Fort Smith was that hub. And that's why we have so many nationally important historic sites right in Fort Smith. The best place to go, in my opinion, obviously, is our site. And that's actually objective. Okay. Not because the Marshall's Museum isn't awesome. The Marshals Museum is beautiful. We'll talk about that a little bit. But because we're where it actually happened, we really are. You come onto our site, you can go to the first fort wall foundations that were formed in 1817. They're right out on top of Belle Point, and you can get a beautiful, beautiful view of the confluence of the Poteau and the Arkansas River. It is actually a really stunning view. Go to my Instagram, WaywardSon119, and it's only 2 or 3 images back where I took a picture as I was closing the grounds the other night of a gorgeous sunset. Absolutely gorgeous sunset over the river. It is a commanding point. The reason it was chosen by Major Long and, it was chosen by Major Long and then built by Major Bradford. But the reason it was chosen by Stephen Long is because he was like, there's no better place. We got like a 30-foot rock bluff that's got a 30 more feet of hill on top of it, a perfect place to build a fort overlooking the confluence of these 2 major waterways and out into this territory where one of these early dividing lines is going to be, which I'm not going to get into because that is the really nerdy, boring stuff that a lot of you wouldn't be interested in. But we're right where we need to be. This is the perfect place. And it's a really beautiful spot. You can still go today down onto the bluff tops. We have mooring bolts, mooring anchors still driven into the top of those bluffs you can see today. You can put your hands on them. And they are 19th century. They would be from the 1800s. Some of those mooring bolts, and I cannot claim this because we don't know for a fact, but some of those mooring bolts very literally are old enough to be mooring bolts that steamships anchored to that could have been bringing the Cherokee on their Trail of Tears. Our Trail of Tears at Fort Smith, we're one of those stops, is the water route via the Arkansas River. So we are a Trail of Tears National Historic Trail. We're one of the sites. You can get your passport stamp for that. And primarily they came by water. So those mooring bolts, there is every chance that some of those bolts could have been the very bolts that moored some of those ships to the shoreline. So like the history is there. You're standing on the ground where the things happened. The 1817 fort foundations, which are right over on top of the bluff. The new fort, which was started in 1838, only 20-something years later, right, is only a few hundred yards back from that in a much larger fort, much larger footprint for a fort. And we still have the original barracks, which is what Judge Parker's courtroom is in. And then we have the 1888 jail addition, which is attached to that building. All of that's still in place. So you can still walk the grounds of where all these things happen. So starting with the military era, I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you this story real quick about the cannon situation, the cannon to a fist fight. And that'll probably bring us pretty close to the break. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to tell you about our early military history. We'll go to break and then we can get into what everyone knows us for, the Wild West and True Grit and John Wayne and Jeff Bridges and all of that kind of stuff. So let's start with the military history. So we start out in 1817. I just told you about, we have our first fort foundations. When that first fort was in play from 1817 to 24, primary mission was to keep the peace between the Osage and the Cherokee, at least on paper. The primary mission was to keep the white settlers safe from the Osage and the Cherokee and the battles that they were having amongst themselves, and as well as the invading peoples of their land, which was the white settlers. They did their job really well for 7 years. Basically had to move the fort another 60 miles upriver and started Fort Gibson in 1824 because basically the trouble had receded that much further west. But in this 7-year period, we have a whole lot of crazy stuff going on. Number one, we have the ill-tempered buffalo incident, or the mad buffalo incident, which is an Osage warrior who showed up on the opposite bank of the river with some 400 warriors with him and basically said, give us gunpowder, give us flints, give us some supplies, and we're going to go kick some Cherokee booty. And the military contingent, Major Bradford and company, which I don't even believe Bradford was on premises at the time. I think it was one of his underlings. I'd have to look that up. It's a lot to remember. So before y'all get all judgy about what I'm remembering, not remembering, it's 80 years. 80 years. You tell me anything you can remember every detail of 80 years of, and then we'll talk. But they show up. They make this claim. The military says, no, we're not going to do that. So they start looking menacing, according to the report, and then they start to build rafts to cross the river en masse. And so the military guys, they roll out the cannons, and they charge them, and they point them across the river, and then the Osage are like, okay, yeah, look at the time. let's get out of here. At least that's the way the story's been told for a long time. I have a little bit of a revisionist take on it, and most modern legitimate historians do. I say legitimate, meaning degree holding, who have done the work and put in the thousands of hours to know how to actually ascertain historicity of an event, as opposed to the people on YouTube right now who read like 2 pages of something on a website that is basically in 2001 Flash HTML, and then say, I know history, and call themselves historians. Okay, the one version is a very ethnocentric, fun way to look at it. Like, oh yeah, the Osage were going to come at them until they pulled out the cannon, and then they turned and ran. And that's how it was told for a long time. The truth of the matter is this: if you understand indigenous peoples and the way things were done in the 17 through the 1800s, wars were conducted in like 20 and 30 man raiding parties. To show up with 400 warriors was unheard of. Okay. Especially amongst these kind of woodland / plains tribes. We're not out with the Apaches and all. We're a little bit further over. We're more of a woodland situation. You don't show up with 400 guys. You show up with 40 guys. You raid some stuff, you do some warfare, you kill each other a little bit, and then you move on. Like it's blood revenge type of stuff. To show up with 400 warriors is something totally different. They could have swarmed that fort, cannons or not. They had 60 men in that fort, 64 men and 2 cannons. That's all they had. They could have wiped them out, no problem, and they well knew it. They'd been fighting with the American military and other indigenous tribes for a long time. They didn't show up to fight. They showed up as a show of force. And that's knowing history. They showed up with so many people, knowing the U.S. government that was garrisoned there at the time would turn around and tell the Cherokee, yo, they're not playing. They didn't show up with 40 men coming looking for you. They showed up with 400 men, and they're ready to do business. It was a show of force to send a message. That's why they turned around and walked away when the cannons came out, because they had already accomplished all they wanted to accomplish. The military was more than aware that there were 400 Osage warriors who were the biggest, baddest mofos on the plains at the time, by the way. And they were armed with guns just as well as they were with bows and arrows and anything else. They showed up to make a statement, and that statement was made. And that's what I think happened, and I think the most historically accurate. But that happened right there on our grounds. And when you stand within those fort foundations, you're standing in the very place where the garrison at the time rolled those guns out and charged those guns and aimed them across the river. And you can look across the river to see where those 400 Osage warriors would have been. See, that's history, baby. That's fascinating to me. And I'll tell you one other story, because one of the other major parts of our early history in that 1817 to like 30-ish time period, there's a long stretch in there where what we have actually is a whiskey war. The indigenous troubles have moved further west. Okay. And now we've got a whiskey war with all the white tavern owners who are trying to illegally run whiskey into the Indian territory because it's highly lucrative, because it's prohibited. And anytime you prohibit something, you guarantee a couple of things. And it's amazing that the U.S. government can't figure this out to this day. You prohibit anything. Number one, you make the value go through the roof, and you ensure people are going to illegally move that stuff to make that money. And 2, you ensure that everyone wants it because you told them they can't have it. So that was going on at the time. And the story I'm going to tell you, which to me cements our place as one of the very earliest Wild West towns in the whole world, is the troops that were at the fort at the time were fighting amongst themselves, or fighting with the local tavern owners to keep them from taking the whiskey into the territory. And 2 of those tavern owners were brothers. And they were named the Bigelows, was their last name. And they were constantly into it with the soldiers at the fort. And then the soldiers at the fort started frequenting their tavern and getting a little bit lubricated. And Captain Stewart did not care for this, who was the guy in charge at the time. So he goes down to have a word with the Bigelows. The Bigelows get a little bit feisty with him and take his cane away from him and beat him nearly to death with his own cane. He has to be carried back to the fort. Okay. Middle of the night that night, the Bigelows awaken to their cabin basically exploding, their tavern blowing up. Because as they poke their head out the hole that's now been blasted in the front, which they both miraculously survived, they see the fort cannon pointed right at their front door from like 15 feet away and a few of the soldiers from the fort. So you beat my captain up. I'm going to bring a cannon down there and we're going to have something to talk about. So this is one of the only places I've ever heard of where someone brought a cannon to a fist fight, to a hand-to-hand fisticuff altercation. And the culmination of that story is glorious because the next morning they go up because they need to file a complaint, right? We saw soldiers from your fort blow a hole in our cabin. And guess who they have to report to? The guy that they beat nearly to death with his own cane just 12 hours before. And his response to them is exactly what you think it might be. He's like, "Oh, man, we don't really have anyone around here by that description. I don't know what could have happened. Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to keep our eyes out. We'll watch for him. If we see anyone that fits the description, we'll put out an APB or whatever. But you guys, you two are going to be the first to know when we get a hold of them." Of course, they never got a hold of them. Interestingly enough, the 4 soldiers that it could have been were reassigned quickly and quietly. So, you tell me, have you ever heard of anywhere else that it was that wild and woolly? I don't think so. So, anyway, we have reached easily our half hour, so I think this is a good place to take a break. And after our break, we will come back and we'll start talking about probably more a little bit of the wild, like what we think of and you guys think of as Wild West history. And in addition to that, some of the great places here in town to grab a bite, some of the more touristy stuff. That'll be how we'll kind of wrap it up tonight. But for now, we need to get to the break. We'll be right back. What is up, all of you wayward souls? I want to tell you guys about our newest sponsor, baddie Optics, a brand based right here in the good old US of A, Portland, Oregon, to be exact. And I bought my first pair of baddie sunglasses about a year and a half ago and fell in love with them, so much so that I got online and ordered a couple of more pair. And when I did, there was a small shipping snafu, an order fulfillment snafu, and I got on the phone, gave them a call, and guess what? I get a call back from who? One of the big men themselves, right there in Portland, from the top of the chain. Have a great conversation, and we end up starting this great relationship we have. They more than made right the little snafu that occurred, and I am now a huge proponent of them because I can tell you from personal experience they are good people, and they're trying to compete with the big boys out there, coming in at a price point of about $40, but using the exact same frame material, TR90, and the same polarization process as the big guys. As it turns out, something I think we are already probably knew in our hearts, when you buy big name sunglasses, you're buying a big name, not necessarily any more quality than you can get somewhere else, like at baddie Optics. They have 29 different styles. They have multiple polarization options for whatever climate you happen to live in, and they back it up with like this lifetime guarantee that if your dog eats your sunglasses, it doesn't matter how you break them, send it back in with a check to cover shipping and handling, and you're golden. You got a new pair on the way. These guys are truly trying to do it right, and they have this philosophy that a really good pair of sunglasses should not cost you so much that you are afraid to wear them. And I think all of us outdoorsmen can relate to that. So if you guys, like me, are very practical and like to get more bang for your buck and wear some great looking sunglasses, check out baddieoptics.com. That's BENDETTI optics.com, or you can go over to Instagram /baddieoptics. And that I highly suggest, whether you buy a pair or not, just to check out the cutest pupper you will ever see modeling sunglasses. Once again, that's baddieoptics.com, and make sure and let them know Wayward Stories sent you. And welcome back. Thank you guys for sticking around through our sponsor break. Okay, so let's get on with the rest of tonight's show. So we wrapped up kind of at the Whiskey War, and I'm going to leave it at the Whiskey War for now. There's a lot of other history, which you'll just have to come down and see us. Come down and say hi to old Justin, because I'll be there at the desk, most likely, and I'll be happy to talk to you all about our site. But let's move on to what we're famous for. Fort Smith is, believe it or not, famous. Maybe not so much in the modern day, but definitely through the 60s, 70s, 80s, because we have this whole fetish in American society with the rough and tumble cowboy, right? We got this whole fetish with the idea of the free Wild West and the way men were men and all that kind of crap. And so through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, Fort Smith kind of ended up on the national radar because a guy named Charles Portis wrote a book you might have heard of called True Grit. And then a movie was made that further cemented it in pop culture history by a guy you've also probably heard of named John Wayne. In 2012, there was a remake of True Grit that had Jeff Bridges in it, which is my personal favorite, which, as you know, we talked about in the last episode. I'm not a big John Wayne guy to start with. Well, to be completely honest, I don't understand anyone that worships celebrities. That's like the most ridiculous thing I can imagine. But I like the Jeff Bridges version a little bit better. Thought he did a really good job with it. But that made Fort Smith famous for a long time. The Hell on the Border Jail, right? So let me tell you about the Hell on the Border Jail. How do we get there? First of all, the second fort starts being built in 1838 as a part, again, of American westward expansionist policies, and it was going to be a part of a line of forts that went from Fort Snelling in Minnesota all the way down to Fort Jessup in Louisiana, and you had Fort Scott as an anchor in the middle, you had Fort Smith as an anchor in the middle, and these were big forts, right? This was supposed to be the final frontier, right? And we are going to have to defend this because the rest of it we're going to give to the indigenous peoples. This is during the 1830s with the Indian Removal Act. This is the thought at the time. That lasted about 30 seconds, as you might expect. It wasn't another 20 years, and we got a whole new line of forts, another 200 miles west, and then another 10, 15 years, and there's a whole nother line of forts, another 100 miles west. And you can actually look at all these forts, these lines that just continually stair-step their way all the way to the west coast over the decades as we took more and more and more and more. But during the 1830s, Fort Smith begins to be rebuilt. Our commissary building, as a matter of fact, is the oldest standing building in Fort Smith, and it was started in 1838. So in this period, we actually have the military there, and it starts to set up, and this is how we kind of become the depot for the Southwest. Like, we became the hub for the Southwest expansion and exploration. Because we're a giant coastal defense fort in the center of the country. Like, literally, we're like a pentagon defense fort with walls that were up to 12 feet tall, supposed to be. Most of them made it to about 8 feet. They were 3 feet thick with 5 bastions. 2 of them got converted into the commissary and the quartermaster building. One of them became a powder magazine because people at the time, Zachary Taylor, anyone's into history, he was a president in the United States, a hero of the Mexican-American War. Maybe you've heard of him. Thought it was the stupidest waste of money ever to build this damn fort. He hated it. Hated the idea. He hated people from Fort Smith. He called them essentially mouth breathers. Like, he hated people in Fort Smith. It's hilarious to read his letters. But he was like, why in the world are we building a 5-gun emplacement coastal defense fort in the middle of the United States? 3 of the gun emplacements are facing Fort Smith. Who are we going to shoot at? Right? This doesn't make a lot of sense. So it gets converted into a supply depot, essentially. And we become the final jump-off point for a lot of stuff that happens. 46 through 48, Mexican-American war soldiers, we were one of the last friendly places to outfit before they jumped off into the theater to go steal Mexico from Mexico. Right? 49 forward, we have the gold rush. And then we have guys like Captain Marcy, who was escorting gold seekers out on a trail that he blazed. He explored the Upper Red River. He explored the Canadian. He built the road that became Route 66 in the Interstate 40 corridor from Fort Smith westward at that time. Following him is Whipple, who went out and built a wagon road, turned it into a wagon road. And then, no, I'm so sorry. I've got so many explorers in my brain because this is a major interp project I'm working on right now that's probably going to end up being a book, but it's going to be we're going to get a lot of mileage out of this because it's been underrepresented in our interp. But it starts with Marcy. He sets the path. Then Whipple comes through to try to see if this is a good route for the Transcon Railroad. And we were this close to having the Transcon. That little pesky Civil War and all of the southern states deciding they didn't want to be in the Union anymore kind of set that back. And the people in the Union were like, after the Civil War, we finally get around to making the Transcon. They're like, do we really want to put our most vital economic lifeline right through the heart of the states that didn't want to be our states anymore? And people thought better of that. So we missed out on that one, but that became the Interstate 40 travel corridor. Beale follows him just a couple of years later and turns it into the wagon road that would literally become what we know as Route 66 from Oklahoma City on, Interstate 40 from Fort Smith on, and literally this 35th parallel And it also became the Rock Island Railroad's entire, I mean, it became a transcon anyway, much later. But the whole point is Fort Smith was where it all started. For everything going west, it all started in Fort Smith. And that's what makes our site so unique and so important in the big scheme of things. Once we move past the 50s and 60s, now we're getting into what we know as the Wild Wild West. Many of you have probably heard of Bass Reeves at this point in history. He had his own show on Paramount Plus. He is a very famous black lawman, a black U.S. Marshal, which was not unheard of. He was not the only one, and he was not the first one to dispel a couple of myths right out of the gate right here. But he was a really good one, and he deserves all the accolades that he has. You may have also heard of someone called Belle Starr. A lot of people haven't, but she is like the female Robin Hood. And she's mostly mythology, but she did run with a rough crew. She married into a couple of rough crews over the years. She was very sympathetic to the Confederate cause during the Civil War and hung out with known bushwhackers, guerrilla guerrilla fighters of the Civil War. So a lot of the stuff she did, she probably did. Stuff we've heard that she did, but in truth, a whole lot of it we have no idea. Just like Bass, we don't know a lot of anything that Bass did except for the records of who he brought in from the territory, the Indian territory, that is, to stand trial for whatever, warrant he had to go out, whatever writ he went out to serve and bring them back. That's what we know about Bass, but everything else about Bass is folklore that was carried on in the black community, thank God, or we wouldn't have anything, right? Because people didn't write down stuff that black people did in 1870. Like the South was salty. They still are, for whatever reason, to this day, about that loss, and they still didn't like black people at that time. It was unheard of in a lot of ways to have a black U.S. Marshal. Judge Parker, who's famous from True Grit and misconceived in many ways, he hung a lot of people because it was the law, and he was on the bench for 21 years. He saw a lot of murder and rape cases, which American law required the death penalty for, over 21 years. But he hated the death penalty. He fought against it constantly. He argued with the Supreme Court. He petitioned the Supreme Court constantly to do away with it. He believed in reform. He employed an ex-slave at one of the single most important jobs, I would think, in that entire courtroom, which was being the bailiff. He gave that guy the job to keep everyone in that courtroom from killing everyone else in that courtroom, right? Like, that's a pretty significant responsibility, I think. Judge Parker was very progressive for his time. He even employed women in his court, in the court system. He was a really interesting guy. But Bass is famous. Belle Starr is famous, and Judge Parker, if you're a True West aficionado or something like that, Judge Parker's also famous. Our site is where that happened. Bass Reeves and Belle Starr both stood trial in our courtroom. Judge Parker sat in his own courtroom, obviously, but in our building, in the old soldiers' barracks that were converted to become the federal court seat after the military abandoned the site. That's where it all happened. And right below your feet, when you're in the courtroom, is the Hell on the Border jail that we became famous for. And it really was a hell. It was never supposed to be a jail. It was actually the mess hall for the soldiers' barracks, right? It was converted, again, after the military abandoned the site and they needed a place for the federal court seat. And we're like, oh, look, property the federal government already owns with a building already on it. Well, we need a federal court seat. This is great. So they convert the basement, which is the mess hall, into a jail, essentially. And it's everything that you might think a hell on the border is. Hell on the border. Why border? Well, the border with Indian territory. You were at the very end of the United States of America at that time, and that was the Indian territory on the other side of the line. So why is it hell? Well, number one, there's no light in there because the guard shacks on the outside block out all of the incoming light. Number two, you got 40 to 60 guys at any one time in any one of those given cells, which is relatively large, but not large for 40 to 60 guys, all pooping in the same bucket at the same time for up to 12 hours a day. They only changed it out twice a day, and they called that honey dipping, and I hate that because that even makes me gag saying it out loud. Think about this. 40 to 60 dudes who are not bathing for 2 to 3 months at a time, who are waiting trial 3 to 6 months at a time because the backlog was so bad, in a dark, dank cellar with no way in and out, no airflow, No light coming in except for whatever lamplight is filtering in from the guard shacks just outside the barred windows. And everyone's pooping in the same bucket. And here's the thing. One of the staples of their diet was boiled cabbage. Okay, they had other things. They had boiled chicken. They had a lot of things. But primarily, you've got a lot of veggies because veggies are easier to come by. They come out of the garden. They're easier to come by. They're cheaper. Cabbage reproduces prolifically. Any of you of the older generation who were forced to eat cabbage at some point by your parents and grandparents who were like Dust Bowl era thinking, Great Depression thinking folks, know that cabbage will basically turn everything in your stomach into goo really fast. For you younger generation, a really, really good analogy, a good analog for this is Taco Bell at midnight. Imagine 60 of you and your best buddies having Taco Bell at midnight and then playing Pin the Tail on the Bucket for the next 2 hours as everyone blows out in the bucket. So imagine that. And that's what this gel was like. To this day, you can see tobacco stains on the walls where they would spit on the walls and it would leave the nicotine stains. That's not because no one's ever painted. Any of you that have ever had to paint or try to paint with whitewash over nicotine knows it don't work. It always bleeds through. The yellow does. So you can see 150-year-old tobacco stains on those walls. That's how legit original this building is. So this is the Wild West of that day. You got men like Bass Reeves going out into the Indian Territory where they're trying to patrol 74,000 square miles. Thank you very much. Half the state of Arkansas and the entire state of Oklahoma except for the Panhandle, which I'm from Oklahoma and we don't even count the Panhandle today. So that's fair, okay? Right out of the gate. 74,000 square miles. They would go out for 2 to 3 months at a time on horseback, chasing down whoever bad guy did whatever bad thing in extremely complicated jurisdictional struggles between the Choctaw Nation, the Cherokee Nation, the Chickasaw Nation. They're all grown-ups. They have their own court system, but the federal government still wants their hand in every pot. And so you have lots of jurisdictional overlap, and it's like, oh, well, if it's indigenous person on indigenous person, you can do that. If it's an indigenous crime on an American crime, then we have to do that. If it's an American on an indigenous person crime, we'll do it over here. Oh, what if it's a white settler who's married into an indigenous tribe and has been adopted into the tribe? Is that an American citizen still, or is that an indigenous citizen now? This is where some of the greatest tragedies occurred, like the Going Snake tragedy, where basically everyone dies, everyone shoots everyone and dies because the U.S. government decided we're going to try this guy. And they were like, no, you're not, because he's ours. And then a posse shows up outside the courthouse and they all shoot each other. Right? Everyone shoots each other. For God's sake, send help and send help quickly, which is one of the famous lines from one of the marshals that was in on that deal. The whole thing was such a cluster that no files were charged, no charges were filed by anyone, and it was all dropped basically just to be like, let's just be done with this. You had people die, we had people die. This is a big train wreck. Let's just be done with it and call it a day. And that's literally how it ended up. That's how wild and woolly things were, okay? All of this is basing out of the site that I get to do Interp every day. So if you want to come to Fort Smith, if you want to get in touch with Wild West history, I suggest go out to the OK Corral and check it out. They had their 60 seconds. They had their 2 or 3 years. Dodge City had their 2 or 3 years. But come see us too. Come see where it all started. Come see where it went on for 80 years. Right? Come see where it went on for 80 years and get that interp, get that history firsthand from us. Come see, man, we've got a beautiful site. You can come see Judge Parker's courtroom. And if we happen to have a volunteer docent available, which we do most days of the week, you can even sit in the space where Judge Parker's desk and chair are. You can go into the courtroom where Belle Starr and Bass Reeves would have stood trial. And again, only if there's a volunteer docent there because of staffing and all those kinds of things. Somebody does have to be in the courtroom to open up that part, but you can at least go in and see it. You can sit in the gallery any time of day. You could come in and go into the Hell on the Border jail any time of day. You can walk out to the first fort, see the walls, stand on the walls, as a matter of fact, and look over the confluence of the river and look out to the west and see what would have been the Indian Territory and basically unknown country until 1850, basically. No one knew on paper what was out there. The only people that knew that were of European ancestry that would have taken any notes were like the French and the Spanish. The Spanish weren't sharing their notes, and the French that were exploring it weren't the kind of people to take notes. They were the couriers. They were the voyagers. They were out there hunting and trapping, and they didn't have no need to take no notes for you or build any cartography because they just knew where they were going. As long as they're on a river, they're good. There's food, there's water, and there's beaver pelts, and that's all they were really after. They weren't really worried about writing everything down at that time. So it was unknown. It was an unknown variable to everyone in the United States government. That's why when we had the Louisiana Purchase, you had so many exploring expeditions. Lewis and Clark is the famous one, right? But there were other ones. There was the Custis Freeman expedition that went up the Red River, ran into trouble when the Spanish were like, hey, who are you and why are you here? And they're like, oh, we just got lost. We took a left at Albuquerque and we should have taken a right. And there was trouble there. The long expedition, Stephen Long's expeditions, he had two. Pike Wilkinson had an expedition, and ever heard of Pike's Peak? You know where these names come from? From all these expeditions in the 30s through the 50s and 60s, where the American government was trying to figure out what the hell was on the other side of the Mississippi River, essentially. And our site was the southern terminus for all of Southwest exploration. Until you get a little bit with Josiah Gregg and the guys going out of Independence down the Santa Fe Trail, but that's even a little bit later. Long and Pike were doing stuff well before that. So we have this really culturally significant site with a lot of cool stuff to check out, and you can get your passport stamps as well, right? So what else is around us? I could tell you stories all night about Fort Smith. I'm not going to do that to you. What else? The Marshals Museum. I mentioned it earlier. It is gorgeous. Okay, just do it. Our site's fee free. Theirs is not. You'll have to pay a few bucks. I think it's $10 or $12 or $13 a person. But it's worth it. It is beautiful. I will give them their due. They absolutely have a beautiful museum. They tell some of the history that connects to our site, but they start all the way back with George Washington and the very first U.S. Marshal that he appointed in the 1789, I think, was the first U.S. Marshal, all the way to the current day. And it's a beautiful interactive museum. Your kids will love it. And it's just a mile and a half from us as the crow flies. It's a quick jump over there. Miss Laura's Brothel Museum I told you about. It is the only remaining brothel from our original row. I know the site director there, and she's awesome. I started out with some of my docentry, getting started over there before I was able to transition over to Fort Smith. They do a great job. They've done a wonderful job of getting the history right, because for 30 years it was crap. It was it's rootin' tootin' and the girls love their job, man. No, that's not it. That was tourist trap. Bring us your money. Isn't it fun to think about the romantic Wild West? No, it was a brothel. The girls did what they had to do to survive. Nobody wants to have to do that to survive. And the current director of that, she has done an incredible job with her cronies of actually bringing it up and telling a really good history of what it was like for women who had to do and ply the oldest trade, basically to survive in that time in American history, right at the turn of the century, where other job options were not really available for them. And I think they've done a wonderful job. They also have a fee, and you do have to be 16 to enter, because it is a brothel museum, and they don't fully shy away. They talk about it. They talk about the realities of the situation. So you do have to be 16 to enter. So consider that if you got the kiddos with you. Fort Smith Museum of History, that is right across the parade ground from us. They do a great job over there too. They actually have Judge Parker's original chair. We don't have it in our collection. We have a reproduction, okay, which is one reason you can come in and sit in it if a docent is available. But they have Judge Parker's original chair, and their courtroom recreation is set up like the 6th Street Courthouse, which is what happened after we had a move from our site to a brand new courthouse in 1896. And so they've set it up like the 1896 courtroom that Judge Parker was in. Or was it 92 when they moved? Or I think it was 92. He was over there just a few years, and we lost the court seat in 96, and Judge Parker died in 1896. But they've got a reproduction over there. They have their more local history. They obviously touch on the Marshals and the hangings and Judge Parker, but they actually touch on a lot broader scope than that. They have, I think it is the first horse-drawn fire carriage for our city is in there. They have one. I just can't remember if it's the first one or not, but I think it's our first one. And it's really cool, man. Get up close and personal with a horse-drawn fire truck, essentially. They have a lot of great history in there, and they're great people over there. You remember when I talked about my Ozark witchcraft program that went so well? Oh, I gave it in their museum up on the second floor. So they have a really nice museum, really great place to check out. So we got the Marshall's Museum, our place. You got Miss Laura's. You got the Fort Smith Museum of History. And I'm trying to think of anything else history related. We do have the Regional Art Museum just up Rogers Avenue, and it's really cool if you're into art. They do a great job of trying to bring culture into the River Valley, and they do a really wonderful job with that. Other than that, let's talk about the broader picture of Fort Smith geographically. What are other reasons that you might want to come here? We have all this history right in downtown. Like, it's all super close together. You go to us, the Museum of History, the Marshall's Museum, Miss Laura's. We're all within a few blocks of each other. It's really cool. We also have the Trolley Museum, and we have trolley rides. If the weather is good or it's the proper time of year, right now it's busy downtown. So even if the weather's bad, they're probably going to be running the trolley. And for $3 or $4, you can hop on the trolley and ride an authentic trolley on authentic trolley tracks in downtown Fort Smith. It's not a very long ride. Like in Little Rock, they have a very extensive trolley network. Ours is a little bit shorter, but again, you're paying $4 for it. It's not like you're breaking the bank for this. So we have a lot of real cool history very close. Matter of fact, the National Cemetery is just it's not even a full block away from our site, and you can walk to it easily. And at the National Cemetery, you can see Judge Parker's grave, and you can see a boatload of Civil War era graves in that cemetery. Many of them are Confederate, and the way you can tell a Confederate grave in a national cemetery versus a federal troop grave is the federal troop graves are rounded on top, and the Confederate graves have an angle on the top of their federal government tombstone, and that way you can discern between who was the rebel and who was loyal at the time of the Civil War. And that's a really interesting aspect of the National Cemetery. And again, it's really close. The reason it's established where it was is because some of the graves from the first fort in 1817, some of the people that died during that era are literally in the National Cemetery, including the first post-surgeon, which is fascinating to me. From I think 1819 is the year he passed, or 20, because it was when Nuttall came through. He made friends with him, and he was heartbroken to find out that he had gotten ill and died. So that's most of the history in downtown. So let's talk about food in Fort Smith, because again, this show is about road trips and travel, right? Let's talk about food. What is Fort Smith? I mean, this is something you can get insider perspective because I've lived here my whole life. Number one, probably pretty cool place would be, well, okay, let me put it to you this way. Doe's Eat Place, there's a few of them in the American South. I'm not sure what all the fuss is about food-wise, though they do make tamales they're very proud of, and I kind of enjoyed their tamales. But here in Fort Smith, they are in the old Joseph Noble Brewery, which was it's like the second or third oldest building in Fort Smith. It was built, I've seen it listed in various ways on the historic register, and then other people say other things, and record keeping wasn't great back then. But it's a brewery from at least 1848. So it's like a 170-something-year-old building, and German immigrant, Joseph Noble, had a brewery. They got a beer garden, the whole thing. It's super cool. They make pretty good food. You will pay for it. It's a little pricey, but it's a super cool historic setting. The building itself is. So that would be one place. This one I like to tell people all the time. Ed Walker's Drive-In. It is a Fort Smith staple. It has been here for a billion years, and even before it was Ed Walker's, it was something else. And I forget, but the ownership basically transferred. It's been in business. It's one of Arkansas's longest running drive-ins, and it's an old school drive-in. You can go inside and eat, but you can also pull up to the curb. And it's one of only 2 places left in Arkansas that you can pull up to the curb and flash your headlights, and they will bring you a beer to your car, because they have been grandfathered in under a law that was extant at one time where you could serve beer curbside. And because they have not had a break in business since then, they are still grandfathered under that law. And even though that is no longer legal in Arkansas, at Ed Walker's it is. I don't drink. I haven't drank in a billion years. But it's still kind of cool, right? That's a little bit kitschy. Like, if you're going to drink and drive, have them bring it right to you, right? That's a very Arkansas thing to do, but it is fun. It is fun. Ed Walker's is great. They call their French dips famous. I very much enjoy their French dips. I don't know that they're world famous, but they're famous with me, and they make my heart happy. And about once every 6 months, I make sure to get down to Ed Walker's and have a French dip. The other thing about Ed Walker's I want to tell you is I can tie it to Fort Smith history, and that Ed Walker sits in essentially what would have been the rifle pit row of the giant earthworks that ringed the entire city of Fort Smith about a mile from the fort gates during the Civil War, and that is the one place in Fort Smith that was ever under attack by Confederate soldiers. That is the one place that a battle ever happened. And it's said between 3,000 and 6,000 Confederates came up Towson Avenue, which at the time was the Fort Towson Military Road, still called Towson today. And they came to make an assault on the fort, which was actually more likely to try to draw the soldiers out of the fort. And Stand Watie, which is a Cherokee Confederate general, and his men snuck up the Poto River side on the peninsula and started firing a cannon into the fort. So they did make an assault on Fort Smith. The 1st Kansas, which is the very first black soldiers allowed to put on a Union uniform and fight for their own freedom, happened to be garrisoned at Fort Smith at that time. And the 1st Kansas were in the rifle pits where Ed Walker's now sits, where Field Fort number 2 would have been, and fought off that Confederate assault and actually pulled out I think they pulled out the mountain howitzers, and they started bombing some of the Confederate positions coming up, and they took out one cannon battery and several horses, and the Confederates were like, that's it, peace, we're out. So there was loss of life, there was some raiding of houses, and that was the one assault on Fort Smith that occurred. So while you're sitting there at Ed Walker's having a French dip, one of their famous French dips, and an awesome shake, by the way, you can imagine that 150, 60 some odd years before, going on all around you, would have been a fierce battle, guns firing, cannons going off as the 1st Kansas valiantly defended Fort Smith, with all honor due to them, and thwarted that Confederate attack on the fort. That to me is just cool. That's fascinating to me. Just like a block over, behind an old metal building, there's a little swale, what you call a swale, in the earth, just at the bottom of the steep hill. That's the last known vestige of those field defense forts that were built, those earthworks around Fort Smith. And not really many people know that. It's not marked for the very purpose of protecting it. You can't really find it unless you know exactly where to look, and I'm not going to tell you where to look exactly. But it is a protected site that cannot be dug. It is on private property, and it is registered on the National Register of Historic Places. And that's crazy to me because this field fort rung Fort Smith. It was in a ring from the Poto River all the way to the Arkansas River, 1 mile out from the fort roughly, with 4 different earthwork field forts built. That's just mind-boggling. But anyway, other places to eat other than Ed Walker's. Let's see, what did we cover here? Doe's and Ed Walker's. Benson's, famous locally for the place to get food when you got the munchies because you drank too much and you're going home from the bar. But it's also great any time of day, open 24 hours, and they make great greasy Americana food. Like it's the epitome of American kind of Southern style food. And they do it really, really well. And it's a local thing. You can only get it here. The Yellow Umbrella. I love the Yellow Umbrella because it's an old style drive-in, but what it is it's a walk-up. You have to walk up to the window, order your food, and set in your car or set out at a picnic table. They don't have a lot of picnic tables to set at, but they make one of the best burgers in this entire state. I love the Yellow Umbrella. Calico County. This one's pretty interesting. Calico County is like classic Southern style food, chicken fried steak, etc. But there's 2 things that stand out about it. You can only get this here. One, Oprah ate there. They have purple chair hung on the wall, and it's the chair that Oprah sat in because Oprah had like family or a friend in Northwest Arkansas, and I guess used to have to fly into Fort Smith before XNA was big enough to have the proper direct flight that Oprah could take. I don't know, but that chair's been in Calico County for decades now, and it hangs on the wall today. You can no longer sit in it. But the other thing is, they serve you cinnamon rolls before dinner instead of dinner rolls, which is kind of awesome. So Calico County is a Fort Smith only thing, and it's really good. It's very good. Then there's the Dairy Freeze off of Midland, all the way almost into Van Buren, right before the Midland Avenue Bridge, is one of the oldest school drive-ins you will ever find. I love it so much. You have to have cash. There's no cards, okay? It's the old style. Push the button. They talk through a speaker. There's no fancy screens like Sonic has today. This is an old school drive-in, and they make burgers and fries and tater tots and chocolate shakes and malteds to beat the band. It is old school. It's retro. I love it. You need to check out the Dairy Freeze if you get the chance. As far as stays, that's like some of the local food that you can only get here. Stays. I'm just going to make it easy. Stay at one of the new hotels on Phoenix Avenue near the airport, or right in downtown on Rogers Avenue. There's a hotel. I think it's the Wyndham, perhaps. That's a pretty good stay. I think it's a little pricey. But just don't. What I can tell you best is what not to do. Do not stay in a hotel on Midland Avenue or Towson or Wheeler. I don't think there is one on Wheeler, but Midland or Towson for sure. Don't. Just don't. Just don't. Just don't. Don't buy a car on Midland or Towson either. Just don't. And any of you out there that know anything about your own town are like, oh, I know. Okay, that's like Garland Avenue, isn't it? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Just don't. And as far as Fort Smith as a hub for other things to do, because we are kind of perfectly centrally located. We're right on 71 South, 49 North kicks off just off of 40. 40's ocean to ocean. Like 71's all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. 49's all the way to the Canadian border. We're kind of centrally located. We are a great place to stay as an overnight, a layover if you're road tripping across the country and you have all the cool history to check out. But an hour west on 40 is Honey Springs Battlefield, which is an Oklahoma State historic site. It's a very significant Civil War battle in the Indian Territory where all the combatants were primarily of different ethnicities. It was the first battle in the Civil War that I'm aware of where the majority of the combatants were non-white combatants. Only really the officers, and I believe it was the 2nd Texas Cavalry, but it was Texas Cavalry. I don't remember if it was 2nd or whatever their division was. And that's really significant. 1st Kansas colored troops were there. The people I just talked about that were defending Fort Smith, they were there at Honey Springs and fought with valor. Like, they are famous for that battle and how they fought in that battle, right in the heart and the heat of the battle. So that's a really cool place to check out. And you can get a National Historic Trail passport stamp there. Even though it's an Oklahoma State historic site, it is on the national, I believe it's the Underground Railroad National Historic Trail. So you can still get a passport stamp there. So it's something to check out. The Mulberry River's close within an hour. Class 2 and 3 whitewater rapids at the right time of year in the spring. Good smallmouth fishing all year. Bird's Adventure Center has fly-ins where airplanes like bush pilots come in and they have music festivals. Lots of cool stuff happens up on the Mulberry. Hot Springs is about 2.5 hours away. I did a whole episode on Hot Springs. I called it An Idiot's Guide to Hot Springs National Park. Pretty good episode. Really popular one. And one you should listen to before you ever go to Hot Springs because you kind of need an idiot's guide to understand what's going on down there. Otherwise, you go in lost. I hear it over and over again. People come into our site and they're like, I went to Hot Springs and I don't know what the hell just happened. Like, I don't really get it. So just listen to that episode if you want to go to Hot Springs. We have the Slate Falls Trail and the Bell Star Cave Trail that are real close here in county, about an hour and 15 minutes south. True wilderness hiking and real bangers that will kick your butt if you're not seriously in decent shape to hike. Just know that. There's lots of hiking up in Northwest Arkansas, less than an hour away. Pea Ridge, Prairie Grove, both. One of them is a national historical battlefield. The other one is a state historic site that is one of the best preserved Civil War battlefields in the entire country. And yeah, man, is that everything I wrote down? That's most of the stuff I've written down, but there's all kinds of things. We have down in Mena, they have some of the, I believe, monument trails have just gone in. If you're into mountain biking, they've got some killer mountain bike trails an hour and a half south of us up in NWA out on, Petty Jean Mountain. Pinnacle Mountain. Like, we have state parks an hour and a half to our east down Interstate 40. We're really centrally located to do a lot of cool stuff. So I say you should come out and explore the wild, wild west in Fort Smith, Arkansas. And from here, you can go out and do just about anything your ding dang little heart pleases. I think that brings us to the end of tonight's show. I really need to wrap this up. It's gotten long and I'm running out of time to record, to be completely honest. So let's try to bring this home here real quick. If any of you guys want to get in touch, mywaywardstory@gmail.com. Again, please rate, review, and subscribe. If you want to follow me on any of my social media accounts, go over to waywardstories.com. You can listen to the show. You can watch it on YouTube. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok. You can get on my Facebook page and send me a friend request. All of that right from the landing page. And yeah, I'm hoping you guys have a great holiday, however you celebrate or don't, whether you road trip or whatever you do. And again, if you need to reach out and talk, mywaywardstory@gmail.com, and make contact with me, and we'll go from there. And with all of that said, I think we're done for the night, guys. I am enjoying the hell out of my new job. Getting paid to do what I've been doing for free for 3.5 years every day, and I don't have a knot in my stomach when I wake up every morning, and I absolutely love it. So you guys come down and see me and say, I listened to it on the podcast, and now here I am, tell me about it. I can't wait. But until you guys do that, or until we meet again on the next episode, whenever that happens, you guys go out there, find some cool adventures, get into some fun, live before you die, and don't forget to be good to each other.